Hey, welcome everybody to our live stream. We are attempting to get started with a live stream this evening, kind of a supplemental edition of the Tech Report podcast that may actually not be in audio, but we're going to do it in video, we're going to do it live, we're going to chat with folks and see how it goes. And I guess the first order of business is to figure out, welcome everybody to our live stream. We are attempting to... That was my first order of business, was to figure out if we messed up the sound. And we did, but I think I got it fixed. Okay. I think in a moment we'll have confirmation that the stream is working and the sound is working. Are you guys deaf now?
I can hear you.
Geoff looks deeply
That's
disturbed. So, you can't hear me, Cyril?
No, I said I can hear you.
Oh, you can. Okay. All right. That's better than deafness. So, yeah, I want to have a copy of the stream running, but every time I do that, then if I don't mute it, then it's a problem. And the problem is I opened like 2 copies of the stream, and there you go. It is working. We have confirmation from the chat room that it is working. So I guess we can begin. Jordan is not here with us. He is heading out of the country for Christmas vacation, and so wasn't able to join us tonight. So we're not going to do audio recording for this thing. We're just going to do the stream and then export to YouTube, I guess, and we'll have a version of it there. And I don't know that we'll have an audio version, like I said. So also, this is a lot more casual than usual. Geoff is drinking a clear liquid. Normally that would be beer, but now I'm quite disturbed by what might actually...
I hit the hard stuff a little early tonight, you know.
It's just pure vodka that Geoff is drinking.
It's actually pre-hydrating before I start putting the bottle.
So I don't know how this is going to go. We get him liquored up and have him start talking about the new storage suite. Geoff, that might be a good topic. We could do a little bit of talk about the new storage suite. Geoff has been working in the ivory tower on a new suite of tests for SSDs because the technology is changing. The interfaces are changing. They're moving to PCI Express and NVMe, and they're going to get a lot faster. But we need to do a better job of testing them. And we also are hoping to find more differences between SSDs, because right now, like on the SATA interface, everything kind of performs the same in a lot of tests. And so we're going to try to push on that. But anyway, Geoff, maybe we should put that on our docket for a little later. See if people have questions about that. The other thing I want to do first, I guess, is just we've got some folks in the chat, and I'm looking at the post here on the site. I can't actually see a count for how many folks are in the chat, but if you guys in the chat room have questions for the panel, for what's left of the panel, what's here, before Geoff's drink kicks in too much, then go ahead and get them. Just type them in the chat. We'll take a look and see what people want to talk about. We're kind of open to whatever tech subject, PC hardware, mobile stuff, which we're now kind of looking at some, or any of that. And we'll also talk a little bit later about the review that I published this week of the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus, and we can get into any questions you guys have on that front as well. So let us know what you guys want to chat about. And I guess while we're waiting for questions, guys, what are we working on? Geoff, you're working on the storage suite stuff, is that right?
Yeah, the storage suite stuff. I've also got an MSI X99 motherboard that I will probably be jumping on next.
Okay, and Cyril, you've got what? You got a case?
Yeah, I'm still working on the case review. I think the flu has slowed me down a little bit, and then I have a monitor, G-Sync monitor, coming up right after that.
So he's sick. We might see vomit on the podcast live.
It's unlikely.
Different kind of live stream that we might get to see. Hopefully not. And okay, so and I'm working on. What am I working on? Well, I'm working on another phone review. Actually, that's kind of a follow-up. I've been doing this big project to get that iPhone review done, and I actually have a bunch of other data to publish on another product. So that's coming. Let's see. So we have some questions. What are you most excited to see at CES? That was one of the questions that we have in the comments for when we said we were going to do the stream. So my answer to that question, we talked about CES a couple episodes ago, didn't we? Or was it last episode? Talking about
last episode.
What's coming this next year. CES itself, I don't know. Is like we have almost, by doing these in-depth reviews on the web that are kind of events, we've almost killed off the whole launching products at CES thing from PC hardware. Like, it doesn't really happen. And so I don't expect to see, I mean, I expect to see what Broadwell U based devices, more Broadwell Y or Core M based devices at CES. I anticipate we'll see those. I'm hoping to see whatever new stuff Oculus Rift has. I'm thinking they may have a new prototype, or prototype I at least haven't seen before, and I'm hoping to get to try that out. I think there may be some silly stuff like really super high-res displays. I'd like really high-res displays, but I also think, honestly, I want to see 60 hertz at 1080p before I even care about 4K in the living room. People don't sit close enough to their TVs. TVs aren't usually big enough for 4K to matter. And I think we're going to see 5K, 8K, crazy K like numbers, and I think it might be a little disappointing. The other thing I would like to see that I don't know we'll see in displays is high dynamic range displays, because the difference between dark and light in displays as we have now and the color range that we have is actually not that great. And we had the technology in terms of camera sensors and displays, actually backlighting and all of that, to do better. But you need a new set of formats for that. Dolby has been pushing on that front, and they do things at CES. I'm hoping that they might have something to announce on that front. I know they've been quietly pushing on some new standards. I say all that to kind of just say, honestly, that's not what I expect to see. I expect to see 8Ks and 6Ks and 5Ks, and I'd really rather see high dynamic range and high frame rate. But I'm not sure that we will. Guys, what else is coming? What are you thinking of for CES?
There's probably going to be more PCI Express SSDs. I think we'll see sort of the next round of either prototypes or close to production ready drives based on the new Sandforce controller that was supposed to be out by the end of this year, and looks like it's been pushed maybe to early next year. But that's probably it. I don't know. It'd be interesting to see if we see more G-Sync or FreeSync monitors. I think probably we'll get the first glimpse of FreeSync stuff maybe at CES.
Yeah. Yeah, that could be good, and I think there's going to be a lot of activity around that early next year. At least AMD has kind of been pushing toward that target. So, Cyril, anything else?
Well, usually at CES, the most interesting stuff is the stuff that you don't expect. That, the little products from, the smaller hardware companies that are kind of cool and that just come, out of left field. So, and I mean, we know that there's going to be like Broadwell U and and all the stuff that you talked about, but it'll be interesting to see what little things we don't expect.
Right. Yeah. So I don't know. CES for me is really weird, because a lot of times the things that make the buzz at the show are not the things I have to do. We kind of like, as a publication, we need to go see what every company has in our space, which is primarily PC hardware, and CES is about consumer electronics, and those are things that often get the buzz at that show. In fact, the PC guys often stay away from really pushing their stuff hard unless it's got a sort of consumer electronic bent to it. So, I don't know. I don't know what we're going to get other than the things we mentioned. But it's just going to be a blur of meetings for me. So you guys know you've done it. So Cyril wrote his famous blog post about how he hates Las Vegas after his first one.
I'm never going back.
We're not asking him to go. You may have noticed. So that's just not happening. But anyway, okay. So we got a few more questions here. What are you guys playing this holiday? I'm playing Wolfenstein: The New Order, which is pretty good FPS. I'm enjoying it. What are you guys playing?
Oh, I haven't had time to play anything recently. I have been playing more and more Project Cars, though. It's kind of it's not coming out sort of officially until March, but I've got sent over an early access deal with it, and it's getting to the point where it's actually kind of a polished game with menus that work properly and settings that are not overlapping each other. So it's a good sort of pick up and play for a little bit and can easily put it down again. So
Cool.
Yeah, I've been playing mostly Race the Sun, which is my sort of stress relief game.
That's a,
And
like
also,
procedurally generated, like it's not a drug trip, but it could be type
no,
of thing.
no, it's not. It's not trippy. It's like just gray, plain, sort of black and whitish graphics. But you have to have very, very fast reflexes. Anyway, it's nice to get the feeling of motion that I like. I've also been playing The Vanishing of Ethan Carter, which is an indie game, sort of moody exploration, mystery solving type of game. That it started off really well, but it's kind of, I don't know. It's a little bit hard to get through because the writing is very cheesy, and it's like set in Poland, but all the characters, like you can tell like the architecture and the it's like a little Polish town, but all the characters are supposed to be American. So there's like Chad and that people like that.
Bros.
So it's
It's all
yeah,
bros.
yeah. So it's a little difficult to get into in that sense. And also there's a scary bit when you, well, I'm not going to spoil it, but it's I don't know. I like what they tried to do with it. But yeah, I expect their next game will probably be a little bit better, a little bit more fleshed out.
I'm tempted to get Tales from the Borderlands, and I also stalled out in the Borderlands pre-sequel. I think because I played all of the DLC for Borderlands 2 and kind of like just let that run its entire course, I wasn't really ready for more Borderlands without it being different, and it's not different enough. But I mean, I still like that stuff. I'm sure I'll go back to it. But yeah, I may do one of the Telltale games like the Tales from the Borderlands 2 this season. So I'm thinking about playing that on a tablet instead of. Have you guys played any of the Telltale games?
I played a little bit of The Walking Dead. Couldn't really get into it though.
Yeah, I played it on a nice big 4K monitor on a big gaming PC, and it was like a animated comic book. It was cool, but you know, just for leisure time, I don't always want to be sitting at a desk. And for that type of game, I think you could just as easily do it on a tablet. So I may try that. I don't know, but that's what I'm playing. And honestly, I played a lot of Kingdom Rush Origins lately. So we talked about that on the podcast, and I cleared that in like no time at all. So okay, let's go on. We got a couple more questions that are interesting. Any chance of seeing reviews of laptops from the bigger vendors, e.g., HP, Lenovo, Acer, Asus, in the future? I would love to do that. I wish we had better laptop coverage. I think that to make that happen, we would need to have more people, and we need to have some relationships with some of the laptop makers that we haven't built with the traditional PC OEMs like the HPs of the world, who, frankly, don't always want to talk to a site like us. So it's work. It's work. It's not we can do it. We've done it before, but it hasn't been a priority for us right now. Our priorities are very much the traditional PC component desktop space, and then the mobile stuff that we're doing. And I think that kind of has to do with how our interests track. My laptop is 5 years old. I just haven't been excited, but I think there are some good ones out there now. Some convertibles that are interesting, but it just hasn't been the primary exciting thing about computing for me. And with limited resources, we kind of have to pick. So I don't know. Cyril, you've done some of our laptop reviews. There may be some interesting things coming up with Core M and stuff that we could hook you up with.
Yeah, that would be fun. But most of it is just smaller, thinner versions of what already exists. So it's in a sense, it's kind of not that exciting. But then again, the main problem with what's out there currently is that it's like, there was kind of a freak show of Windows 8 devices for a while, where they just tried every possible way to put a touch screen on a system and make it sort of convertible. If you go to like an actual store like Best Buy or Future Shop here, it's like it's kind of scary. It is. It's like that scene in what is it, Alien Resurrection, where they have all the jars with like clones of Ripley that are all misshapen and horrible. So I think this generation we're gonna see like the a little bit of natural selection, the best ones, the winning sort of clones from that sort of generation are gonna be refined and hopefully got into a state where they're actually compelling and interesting and just good systems to actually use.
Yeah, I mean, we're getting more high density displays and IPS panels and all of those things that you want, and Core M particularly, I think, looks nice. So it may be time for us to turn our focus back to that. But honestly, it hasn't been the thing that we've been all about, and maybe it needs to be. But okay, let's look at this next one, because we have a person in the chat, Jordan Drake 90, who says, "This is Jordan. I do not approve of this. Carry on." So guys, I think we're in trouble. And I just want to say to Jordan that there is a box here in the four-way view that you could be in right now discussing with us if you wanted to. So maybe we should. Do we need to get the chimp out, guys? Do we need to bring that back? I think Jordan should call in and join us. So he says, "Don't kid yourselves. It's me." That's pretty much got to be Jordan. So anyway, Jordan, you should be here on the show. Just call and you can join us. Anyway, let's go. Let's skip to another question. We've got some good questions tonight, guys. Here's one that's one of the most discussed topics on the site, actually. Let me see. I've now lost it. What are the panel's thoughts on the recent purchase of AnandTech and the current state of online publishing? So, yeah, we're touching that with the 10-foot pole. No, it is. Things are changing, right? It's a different world than it was, and that obviously is a interesting thing, not just because it happened, and because Anand and Chimpy moved to Apple and the scene changed, but the fact that the guys who bought Tom's Hardware Guide some while ago now have purchased AnandTech to consolidate their iron grip on the PC hardware publishing space. And so independent publishing kind of took a hit, I guess you could say, with the consolidation that comes with that. So a lot of folks have been asking questions about what this means for us or what our status is, and I did answer some of these questions in the chat about this story. I guess we can pull up this. There we go. And I guess the thing to say is just that, like, I am the owner of the Tech Report and the editor-in-chief. We are an independent publication now. We sell ads to get support, and we, are basically taking other jobs delivering pizza. No, we have the subscription stuff that we've done this past year, which has been a nice little addition to our support network, and it creates the right relationship between us and you in that we are beholden directly to you for our income. We want to serve you. We believe that your interests are the interests that we should represent as people who review these things, write about these things, and by creating that way for you guys to support us directly, we're hoping that we can have a business that's sustainable, that also has the right set of incentives for everybody involved. So that's kind of my speech about that. Guys, do you want to say anything else?
Give us more money, please.
We really could use more subscribers. It's kind of a pay what you want system. And it's very easy to subscribe. It's just credit cards. When you subscribe, then any amount of money gets you a membership tag in the forums when you post, then that shows up. It gets you email notifications that you can turn on when other people reply to your comments, which is not a feature that is built into the site by default, but we added it for subscribers. You get single page views of our articles. Let me show you this because this is kind of nifty. Like here's the iPhone 6 Plus review, and right at the top we hit single page, and then you just have the entire thing that you get to scroll through with one long page of goodness that you get for any amount that you pay when you subscribe. And you also get access to our contributors only forum, where we will answer more questions for you along these lines or others. And then you get 20% off of Macrium Reflect, which is one of the best imaging and backup programs around. If you beat the average, which currently stands at $44.62, then you get all the stuff in the silver subscription, and you can up or downvote posts 3 times, up to 3 times. You get access to our high-res 4 megapixel image galleries, and you get 40% off Macrium Reflect instead of 20. So we have top contributors, and if you pay enough to be in that list, then you get your name and lights here on the site and other places around the site. And people have been very generous. We appreciate it, but more support is always appreciated. So there's a little frequently asked questions thing on the page. We'll answer questions if you email us or whatever, if you have them, about how it all works. We ask that folks, if they can, pick an amount where they can actually set a recurring yearly subscription, and we're working on adding some additional features that we'll probably roll out, I hope, in the next several weeks to make subscriptions even better. So that's part of what we're doing, and I don't know, guys, what else should we say?
I also mow lawns in addition to delivering pizza. So.
I think the other thing to be said is that web publishing is at a difficult place because advertisers no longer value web impressions like they used to, and a lot of what people want to do instead of traditional advertising is stuff that we don't necessarily like the native advertising thing, where there's sometimes just not clear delineation between editorial content on a site and something that is a sponsored content. I think there might be a way to sort of make that clear, benefit your readers, and still do something along those lines. Like we had a sponsored how to build a PC guide a couple years ago that included a video that you did, Geoff, that was an amazing video, an amazing resource. We just had to set the terms and direct that editorially ourselves. And so there maybe are chances there, but honestly, I mean, what I'm trying to say is it's just a difficult business climate right now. And I think that, I think that independent media are going to struggle in this environment, and we're going to need to be creative in order to survive and thrive. And that's certainly our goal is to survive and thrive. So we have a lot of things we want to do. We have a lot of things like the laptop thing you guys are asking about that everybody asks us. They want more of what we do, and the key to that is just getting everybody support. So if you guys have other specific questions about this issue, then I'll take them. Otherwise, I think that kind of addresses the state of things. I guess the other thing is this is an opportunity for us as the landscape changes. My hope is that we can serve everybody really well, continue to do what we do well, and that because of changes in the market that we can grow. That'd be awesome. That's always what we want to do. So I think that handles that. Did I miss anything, Cyril? Did I miss something?
No, that sounds about right.
So, okay. Let's see. Any thoughts on when we might see a more significant jump in single-threaded CPU performance on the desktop? It's been dribs and drabs, in my opinion, since Nehalem. I don't know, man. I thought Sandy Bridge was pretty good. Wouldn't you guys say that?
I don't know, man. I upgraded to well, I was forced to upgrade from an i5 750 to I think a 38 something, whatever the pre Haswell uh, equivalent of the 4700K was, and I honestly didn't notice that big a difference. It was even like in Photoshop, just opening Photoshop, applying filters, saving images. It's pretty close. It's a little bit faster here and there, but I didn't notice a huge jump.
Yeah. Now, there are some interesting questions about the applications and the software and the rest of the infrastructure around it. About if you had like a CPU that was legitimately 2 or 3 times as fast, how much faster would the things that you just described be? Right. Say Sandy Bridge is 20% faster than Nehalem, right? Say that's your average or whatever. Maybe it's more like 15, but depends on the application. And there's more goodness now than there was when it came out because of expanded AVX support in software. But how much of that additional gain translates into lower load times for Photoshop or things like that? I don't think it's entirely your CPU that you're waiting on. And it's
Well, when it's like saving converting an image from just a PSD and compressed PSD to JPEG, I assume all of that happens on the CPU.
yeah, I mean, there are also some interesting questions about like if you have really poorly written software that Adobe didn't optimize, like how much additional CPU goodness do you really like get to take advantage of when their code stinks?
But I mean, I remember 10 years ago just jumping from like one generation to the next, and it would actually be scary because like Windows, like just the UI almost seemed to respond like just before I clicked. It was just that much faster that it gave me the illusion that Windows actually opened before I double clicked, just before I double clicked folders and so forth. So you don't really get those kinds of jumps anymore. It's all very incremental, and in certain areas, it does feel like they've kind of maxed out at least palpable performance in a lot of areas.
Okay, so I'll give you 3 things, maybe 4, that could be hope on this front. How's that? The next architecture from Intel is Skylake, and it will be 14 nanometers, but it's the talk or whatever where it's architectural refresh, not like Broadwell where it's the just the die shrink. And I shouldn't say just the die shrink. That's maybe the hardest part, and you can get some big gains from that. But I think that there's the possibility that you see a nice increase in performance in Skylake. Okay. There are like 5 or 6 things that you could say that we could get some really nice single thread performance gains from. So the next one is AMD is working on an x86 compatible CPU Zen that is to replace Bulldozer. I expect to see that in 2016. I expect it to be competitive with what Intel has to offer. How close they get to where Intel winds up being then is a tough question, but I think that say that they just do well with that course. Say they get close and they push Intel and price pressure is there and there's real competition. That could change priorities and drive more IPC in the next several generations after that. Or even like right away if Intel's kind of like, man, we need to turn the crank. Because honestly, I think they keep some things in reserve because it's easier for them as a chip maker if they don't have to like squeeze really hard on the binning and things like that. So AMD doing well, either by like say it's a big win off of the AMD core and it just moves things forward itself, or pressuring Intel, that could help. Another thing that you have to look at is I just finished this iPhone review and we looked at the performance gains that Apple got in its architecture. Well, really it was ARM architecture with the iPhone like 4, which I tested, which was so slow that the benchmarks took forever to run, guys. Like it was bad, right? And then you get this Swift core in the iPhone 5, and it got to be a lot faster. And similarly, Qualcomm has this Great core that's a custom ARM core as well that's pretty good. And then you get the Cyclone core that's in the iPhone 5S, and it's a huge jump. It's really nice. They moved to 64-bit. They do ARM v8. It's a really nice thing. And they're still at like 1.4 gigahertz, 1.3 gigahertz. They moved to the iPhone 6, and they further enhance what was called the Cyclone core. We don't really know the internal name of the new Apple core, but they're at like 1.4 gigahertz, and they got another 20% or so performance over the 1.3 gigahertz one before, so 7%, 8% clock increase, and a significantly more performance increase. Apple has all the money, and they are pushing on this front. It's possible that they could be the ones to give us some pretty big IPC gains. They have a good team of people doing what they do. So that's another source of possible stuff, or possible IPC gains. Now, it may take some time for that pressure to push Intel or however this works out, but I could see that being something that matters. Other things, guys, on package stacked memory with the through silicon vias is going to be a thing. I think we'll see it mostly in GPUs and GPU computing before we see it on CPUs, but you could have either the CPU stacked with memory or on the same package in a way that really increases performance, because you get like a local pool of very fast memory that like fits a lot of stuff into it, where those local caches, sort of like an L4 cache, gets to be gigabytes in size, and that could be really interesting for per core performance or per thread performance. So I think there's the possibility that we see some IPC gains that are not on the order of what Intel has been doling out on this sort of 5 to 7% a year rate, but something higher than that from those sources.
Yeah, I mean, I could definitely see Apple after they get to a certain point with the A series cores, just kind of give up on Intel and just start making MacBooks with their own, and iMacs with their own CPUs that could well be faster.
I mean, given where they are now with the chips they have, and like what they've done to customize their technology for not just iPhones, but then like look at that A8X and the iPad 2 Air 2, where they put in 3 cores and gave it more memory. I mean, having that flexibility of like, I built this chip for this solution, and it's all mine, and I know what I'm going to pay for it because it's just what it costs to manufacture. I think it may be hard for them to resist. I don't know that Intel has enough value add between its own architecture and then whatever it does on process tech to constantly keep their business. And they're not afraid to make a transition to a different instruction set architecture, because that's all they like. That's the whole history of the Mac. It's 68,000 to power to x86 to who knows now. Maybe ARM. So, yeah.
Yeah, the only downside obviously would be losing the ability to run Windows on it. Although, Microsoft has a version of Windows for ARM now, so that could change.
Yeah, and I don't know how much you care about that. And also, there are emulation options, or if you're always connected, you could literally have like a cloud-based remote desktop session to run your Windows stuff in on a Mac. Like, there are lots of ways that you get that satisfaction. And you don't get like local gaming on your MacBook, which maybe is the thing that some folks want out of that, but I don't know that drives their decision enough. So
yeah, that's true.
All right, so let's see, what other questions do we have here in the chat room? I've been blabbing and I have not followed. Geoff, are there any good ones for?
There was one about upgrading a chipset. Let me see.
Is upgrading chipsets a worthwhile endeavor? If we're on Sandy Bridge, is we're jumping to a Z97 setup to get an M.2 slot and an Intel native USB 3. Seems like a lot of money for not a lot of gain. Geoff?
Basically, yeah.
It's a lot of money.
It sort of depends on what you're doing with USB 3. The Intel solution is better than the sort of NEC Renesas chip that's on a lot of the older boards. But that chip is fine. It's still a lot faster than USB 2, and especially if you're using a mechanical drive as opposed to an SSD, you're going to be limited by your storage device before you're going to be limited by that particular or sort of a third-party USB 3 implementation. And on the SSD front, right now there aren't really any SSDs that take full advantage of the M.2 slot that's on all these new Intel boards. There's one Plex store drive that you can buy, but it's still based on AHCI, and it's not sort of definitely faster than the fastest SATA drives out there. And then there's also, sort of from the storage perspective, which is something that we've been running into trying to develop this new storage test, is finding real-world situations where applications are actually storage bound. And it's sort of, once you've moved to an SSD, the PCI Express SSDs are faster, but not necessarily in ways that you're going to notice in a desktop system, especially if you're running sort of typical client or consumer workloads. So, if you're happy with the rest of the system, the chipset is not really a reason to upgrade. One thing that has improved a little bit, Sandy Bridge is not that old, but stuff like the motherboard firmware and software has gotten quite a bit better over the last couple of years, especially on Asus boards in particular. So in terms of sort of a whole package experience, the motherboards that you can get now are better than the ones from a few generations ago, but I'm not sure I'd upgrade just for that reason either.
Yeah, and on the SSD front, you can get an adapter to put an M.2 drive into like a little card that plugs into a PCI Express slot, right?
Yes and no. Then you sort of have to. It sort of depends on what kind of drive it is. Like the Plex store drive, actually, you can get a version of it that actually comes on a riser card, and because the drive is based on the AHCI protocol, it's got fairly robust operating system support. It boots operating systems without issue. But some of the pure PCI Express SSDs, it's a little. The situation getting Windows to boot off those drives is not sort of a foregone conclusion. Actually haven't seen a lot of those drives yet either, and certainly not sort of consumer-oriented ones, which is, part of the issue is motherboards supporting these drives in their firmware to allow you to boot from them.
Yeah, I just get the sense that once this all starts to get worked out, that I'm not sure that having that little M.2 slot is really going to be an advantage over having an adapter-based solution of some sort. But maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, it sort of depends on the motherboard makers and what operating system you're running. Intel takes care of a certain number of things through its RST driver, which is only going to work with SSDs that are plugged in through that M.2 slot. So stuff like boot support they take care of. But if you were to run the same drive through an adapter, just through, even if you're running through PCI Express lanes that are still on the chipset, you're not going to get that driver storage support from Intel. So it's a little bit more a Wild West for stuff like that. Honestly, I think the biggest upgrade for SSDs is just getting a bigger drive and being able to have more games and more of your stuff on it. The difference between trying to meter out what you squeeze onto a 120 gig drive or a 240 class gig drive versus, if you had half a terabyte or a full terabyte. I think that's the bigger difference now with SSDs.
Yeah, now. I'm curious to see what happens in the next year when some of these other drives come out. Maybe we get good stuff. So, do you want to, Geoff? You want to talk about the new storage suite a little bit, or do you?
Sure.
I don't know. You're going to write about it, right? And you haven't done that.
I'm working on a little blog post about it, but it only covers some of the tests. There's not a whole lot to say.
Well, our storage suite now is how old? Like, how long have you been using the
more
same?
Than 3 years old.
And so we have a pair of test systems, right? And there's a set of tests, and that's changed a little over time, but generally you don't want to change too much because then you got to retest everything if you want to have results for it, right?
Yeah.
And so we we put some effort in every time we do this to like get some things custom developed in terms of like the copy tests and some of that stuff, and the workloads, right? Like you're recording your own workstation traces for like weeks, is it?
Yeah, that's sort of the last thing that I've got of it. The tool we use to do that has changed quite a bit since the last time we used it. So that's kind of the last remaining thing that we've got to sort out. But we do have an all new version of FileBench, which is sort of the original name for this scripted real-world file copy test, which we sort of upgraded. It's now RoboBench. It uses the Windows RoboCopy command, which lets us test a whole bunch of different threads instead of just having a single thread. And we're combining that with a RAM disk so that we can do read and write speeds in addition to copy speed. So that'll give us, in addition to kind of targeted sequential tests that use just sort of random I/O or a contrived I/O pattern, this will actually tell us how SSDs read, write, and copy specific file types across multiple sort of parallel threads. So that's interesting. That's sort of the big custom developed solution that we've got so far, and sort of the preliminary results are interesting. Looking at some tests I did with media files now, so sort of like really big movies, MP3s, raw image files, and all the SSDs that I tested sort of hit their peak speed as soon as we got up to like 4 threads. So with the larger files, you don't actually need to hammer SSDs that fast to sort of saturate them when you're doing sequential tests like this. But when I switch to what I'm calling the work access pattern, which is much, much smaller files, it's sort of all of my personal TR files, which are smaller spreadsheets and much smaller image files that are optimized for the web. We've got some programming related files that Bruno was able to hook us up with. If you look at that, the performance continues to scale up even as you hit 128 threads, which is sort of the maximum number that the RoboCopy command can handle. So it's one of these situations, and then it ramps up quite aggressively on this Intel, the DCP3700, which is a PCI Express kind of data center grade drive that uses the NVMe Express protocol. It has a 4-lane Gen 3 PCI Express connector, so it's
Badass.
about as fast as, yeah, it's like a $2,600 drive that we're sort of testing. That's sort of our high benchmark. We want.
That's how much it costs?
Oh yeah,
I have one sitting over there. I had to like get that out and like look at it. Every day I'm gonna look at it and go, oh.
Yeah.
Wow, I didn't realize it was that expensive. So yeah, it's a badass drive, and it's a good thing because I think that a $2,600 drive now, we may be the best proxy for the performance we can expect from like your average drive a couple of years from now, hopefully, right?
Well, it's sort of one of these yes and no, because one of the things I'm noticing with that drive, I mean, with a single thread, it's still very, very fast. But to really hit top speed with it, especially with random I/O, you have to hit it with an incredible amount of concurrent I/O to really sort of get the most of it. And it's not even, one thread with a really deep queue depth. You got to hit it with multiple threads, deep queue depths in order to sort of peak it out. Whereas you look at the M6E, which is more consumer grade PCI Express drive, and something like the 850 Pro, and they're maxed out pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And it's this question where we can contrive a test and say, oh, well, we're going to come up with this arbitrarily large load that we know will stretch the fastest drive we can get our hands on. But then it's a question of how relevant is that number, especially in a client computing sense, where the real world traces that we've done, most of the time you're dealing with a queue depth of less than 4. So that's less than 4 simultaneous requests.
And that just has to do with the way desktop applications work, right? Not just
Right.
the drives are engineered for that too. But like when you use your desktop as one guy or gal, when you do things, you don't usually generate lots of simultaneous outstanding requests, right?
Right. And well, and that's the thing with SSDs. I mean, they're basically massively powered memory arrays, so they get faster by spreading the work over a greater number of chips. But if they're only getting, short bursts of work, there isn't a whole lot to spread out. So it's good. You get sort of as fast as the SSD can do, or you still have very fast performance with these sort of low queue depths and sort of more typical client workloads, and that's maybe why people don't necessarily feel a huge difference in speed. going between different SSDs is because they're all kind of in the same ballpark, and they're kind of in the instantaneous from a system perspective ballpark. So it's one of those things. I was talking to Intel about this, and they're saying they're actually going to developers, particularly game developers, trying to show them ways where you have all of this performance now with PCI Express SSDs. Here's what you could do if you assume that your audience had this much bandwidth in terms of streaming worlds and things off of local storage. So it's one of those situations where to really take advantage of the PCI Express drives, I think outside of a server environment, or if you're dealing with sort of heavy duty engineering applications or doing sort of fluid simulations or things like that, we're going to need to see applications change to sort of recognize that there's an SSD and that a lot of people have them, and that there's a lot of performance on tap that they can take advantage of.
Yeah. Now here's a question in the chat. Can you run simultaneous instances of Robocopy at 128 threads each to achieve all the threads?
Probably.
I was gonna say you're not doing how many. I mean, that's basically what you're doing is like turning it up, right? That's what you're testing the limits now.
Right. I mean, I think he's asking if I could run multiple copies of it at 128.
Oh, go even further to have.
Yeah.
What does all the threads mean? Like, how many is all the threads? Because do we need to test that?
We're well beyond the number of CPU cores in this system. So.
Right. I've got a Haswell EP dual socket thing over here with like all 40 threads or something. We could do that. Like, it's got the 3700 in it, and it's got like 128 gigs of like just DDR4. So if you needed all the threads, I think they'd fit in that box.
Well, and it's interesting is Intel recommends testing its sort of server SSDs with
server hardware,
more threads, or as many threads as you have physical processor cores.
Yeah.
And you can actually notice some of the numbers that we'll be publishing probably tomorrow. You can actually see that on the Intel drive, even if you have a workload that has 4 simultaneous requests, if you have those all with assigned to a single worker, the performance is lower than if you spread those 4 requests over 4 workers, where only you have a queue depth of 1 with each, as opposed to a single worker with a queue depth of 4. So on this Intel server SSD at least, and also on the M6E, you do get a performance boost if you just spread the load out in a different way.
Yeah. I should say that, like, Geoff is very regular about publishing articles for us, but he's been a little quiet lately, and one of the reasons is every so often he kind of has to go off to the ivory tower and figure out what to do right so that we can do a good job of sort of iterating on the test procedures for the next little while. And so that's what this is kind of about, right?
Yeah. It's sort of, and the PCI Express SSDs are so new that it's and you can't really get your hand on the class of drive that's probably going to be popular in the next year. There aren't really these sort of 2-lane NVM Express drives, which is sort of what you would want, I think, to get if you were holding out for a PCI Express SSD. Something that'll work in the existing motherboards, but at least ditches this older age CI protocol that's got a whole bunch of overhead and legacy stuff left over from mechanical drives. So you're kind of guessing, in a sense, about what it's going to take to stress these SSDs, and then trying to balance that out with, am I spending a bunch of time testing conditions that aren't actually important for a desktop user. I mean, if we were testing these in an enterprise context, you could go to town with the number of requests or the sort of loads that you fire at these drives. But evaluating them in a desktop or consumer context is a little bit more difficult.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the question is, how can we test to understand, like, whether there are meaningful performance differences for people buying these things? Mm-hmm. Because if there aren't, then you should buy the cheapest cost per gigabyte and walk away, right? It's like,
which is sort of where we are
right,
with SATA SSDs
right
now. Yeah.
Find the deal, fire and forget. And if that's the terms of things, that's fine, but it makes storage less interesting and is a little bit unfortunate. If there's more to it, then we got to search to find what the more is and what workloads will show you the benefits of faster storage. So, yeah.
or at least be able to definitively say that there is no difference.
Right. We may spend a lot of effort to just prove that you should buy the cheapest cost per gigabyte.
Spent that much effort in the first place.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but that's sometimes what happens when you try to do good testing. Is the results may not be what you hope for, but they can be educational. Anyway, so do we have other questions, guys? I think we're pushing through these questions here. I'm trying to see. Are we missing anything else from the chat? Why we're not seeing more PCIe SSDs in PC laptops? Why pretty much only Apple? I think it's because Apple went and commissioned and built a solution, and the rest of them we're still waiting for, like we are on the desktop. Isn't that really the deal? I mean,
well, that's part of it. And Windows 8.1. I mean, it depends on whether or not you get a true PCI Express SSD that supports NVMe Express, or if you're looking at an AHCI one. But NVMe Express requires, unless you're using Windows 8.1, it requires third-party drivers. So that's another fairly substantial barrier.
Okay.
And I think a lot of it is, I mean, there aren't as many controllers either. I think the only controller now that's sort of an off-the-shelf design that someone can buy comes from Marvell, in terms of sort of a PC class controller that would be suitable to put in something like a notebook. So there isn't a lot of choice either. I think that'll change once the SandForce chip comes out. But even then, that may be overkill, I think, for sort of typical notebooks.
Yeah, I guess we'll see. So, Geoff, here's another question. Well, basically, this is just everyone seems to be telling you they're jealous. The people in Vancouver are jealous of the fact that there's a TR barbecue in Michigan. And it's your fault because it hasn't happened.
Clearly.
Something needs to happen. Are they aware that Cyril, you also are in Vancouver and are not barbecuing anything for anyone as far as anybody knows?
I mean, you're welcome to barbecue things in my apartment, but I think it would violate a number of safety codes, because it's I guess.
But you're feeding that seagull. You could feed a reader one at a time.
Well, if they can sort of swoop in and land on the handrail, yeah.
There you go. But Geoff, I think you need to maybe have another TR get together up that way.
Yeah, we could do that again. I don't want to really have it in my backyard, but
no, I'm not actually advocating for that. But that would be weird. But yeah, somewhere maybe. So, since we're speculating, how good or bad do you think the next high-end Radeon will be? I don't know. Have you guys seen any of the rumors about the R9 380 or whatever? They're out there.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff out. I mean, I think it's gonna be really interesting if they use HBM, the on-package memory. But
yeah, but that was like those rumors kind of dried up as they got closer. The HBM stuff, it's starting to look like they're not going to have that. And if they don't, I don't know. The rumors kind of put it as like faster than the GTX 980. And this is one of the other questions we missed, was speculation about when we'll see the GM200 or the big Maxwell. Not because the Maxwell we have now, the 204 that's in the GTX 980, is actually like the mid-size one. It's a little bigger than some mid-size chips, but it's kind of not the big one. So we're expecting a bigger Maxwell in a faster GeForce. And I think that all of this stuff is going to play out in the next few months of next year. Like the first few months of next year. Like I think in Q1, maybe, depending, I mean this is rumors, but maybe we're going to have a new big Radeon and a new bigger GeForce. And I don't know who's going to win. Like the rumors are looking reasonably good for the R9 380, but I don't know. This is all a little weird just because I don't feel like we have, I've been saying this for a long time, but AMD is really keeping these close to the vest. I don't think we have a good sense of what they're doing, and so it's all just kind of rumors and speculation at this point. And I wish I could give you like some informed speculation that would be based on something I know that I can't tell you about, but honestly I don't feel like I'm in that position this point on that particular topic. So I'm as curious as anybody to find out what happens. I think there's every possibility Well, there are a lot of smart people at AMD. There's every possibility that they build something that makes that gives Maxwell a run for its money, even big Maxwell. But I don't know. Um, do you guys expect monitors to come out in 2015 that support G-Sync and FreeSync? And then it says in parentheses DisplayPort 1.3 adaptive VSync. Probably
That would
not.
be really nice.
Yeah. I don't know. Adaptive sync is a little extension to the DisplayPort spec. NVIDIA told us they didn't think that any extension to the DisplayPort spec was necessary to support adaptive refresh rates. AMD went and championed with VESA this little extension that lets monitors know about, or lets video cards know about what monitors can do. That's kind of what the adaptive sync thing is about. But the hard work for AMD is not that. It's in working with the monitor chip makers to enable products that really support adaptive refresh correctly. And that's what Project FreeSync is about, which is AMD's own kind of thing. And I think what AMD may be able to sort of eventually kick off is that adaptive sync support can become something like a commodity thing that everybody has. But I don't know that that happens with the first generation of FreeSync stuff. I think we could have kind of competing standards, both with some kind of a price premium, and right now there's a big premium for the G-Sync stuff for two reasons. One is it's the only game in town, and the other one is that they're using that FPGA in hardware instead of using a custom ASIC, and that's more expensive. So it does the job, but it costs more. It's entirely possible that NVIDIA could come out with a custom ASIC of G-Sync and drive costs down to compete with FreeSync. It's also possible that NVIDIA could hand off support or hand off license to other monitor chip makers G-Sync capability. I think that because they've been the leader in terms of having something on the market first, they can do a lot of things. And there's a whole game that has to play out here before we get to the point where it's just plug and play in it all. World that we all want, I think, is just I can pick a monitor, I can pick a video card, and I get adaptive refresh rates no matter what. But man, I think there's going to be a really interesting set of battles around that this year before we know how it's going to go. So I don't know. What do you guys think? What do you talked with Richard Huddy at GDC, right?
Yeah. I don't think he mentioned anything about I don't think G-Sync really came up. I think it was all for within the next 6 months when FreeSync monitors would start coming out.
Right. So, yeah. Okay. It all feels like early days to me, and I don't think it's as simple as, maybe it is, but I don't think it's as simple as AMD enables some FreeSync monitors, it becomes free and ubiquitous, and NVIDIA chooses to support it. I think that there's a lot more drama between here and where we want to go. So I don't know, Geoff. Are you?
Well, that's the thing, is that adaptive sync is not the same as FreeSync. Too, there's this thing that FreeSync or adaptive sync is this part of this open spec, and that's great, and anybody can just support it. But supporting active sync is not sufficient on its own to support FreeSync, and FreeSync also requires. I can't remember what specifically it was that Huddy said, but there is some additional cost that comes with supporting FreeSync. I mean, it's much less than doing the FPGA route that is required by G-Sync right now, but it's not this kind of free, open, unicorn of a solution.
Mm-hmm. Well, AMD did mention recently that there was some special sauce that they haven't talked about yet that's associated with FreeSync or required for FreeSync to work, and so we're supposedly going to hear more about that at CES. But yeah, it's not as simple as just supporting the latest DisplayPort spec, I don't think.
Well, and not only that, but if you have an R9 280, R9 280X, a bunch R9 270, a bunch of the currently shipping Radeons, they will not work with FreeSync. You have to have a 290, 290X, 285, or maybe what is it, the 260 stuff with the
I don't think those are supported.
Okay, but basically you have to have just a very select group of Radeons out there now, which include the high-end cards that are the best sort of gaming cards. But you got to have those, or you're not compatible with the FreeSync thing at all. So we're talking about everything's got to turn on that side. You got to upgrade your GPU more likely than not in order to get the monitor support as well. So I don't know, man. I don't know that this all turns out as free and open as everybody would like to think. But we'll see. So, other questions from the chat? Should we talk about? If you're in the chat, tell me. Should we talk about the iPhone 6 review? We haven't really talked about it. We've been doing this for what, an hour now, and we've still got questions coming in. So I'm happy to talk about whatever you guys want to talk about, or we could talk iPhone if you guys want to do that. Yeah, there are a few things I'd call out in the review if you want to talk about it.
Boo! Apple sucks.
Please no. Chuckula wants a live bin test on a iPhone 6 Plus. Oh man, that was brutal.
I'll bend my iPhone 5 if you get me an iPhone 6. I'll do it.
Here's a 6. But I'm not giving it to you. I'm just showing it to you. there's no.
I meant Chuckula.
Oh, if Chuckula will, okay.
Yeah, if he gets me a free iPhone 6, I'll bend my iPhone 5.
I don't know, man. You know, I guess I'd say that anything where you have this much like height in your pocket is terrifying to me, just because the amount of leverage involved, the force involved. It's not specific to an iPhone, but any phablet, the amount of force, leverage involved, if you like push on it in the middle and your like body is pushing on it at the top and the bottom somehow, if you bump into something when it's in your pocket, that scares me a little bit. But I don't know. This thing hasn't like even come close to showing any signs of a problem. I've been carrying around in my pocket for a month, and if you saw the videos, the guy's like thumbs are like all white and everything, where he's pushing so hard to make it bend. I just thought that was a bunch of hooey. So I don't know.
Well, some people were claiming that their iPhone got slightly bent from just being in a pocket, but that
I'd say that too if I wanted them to replace it.
On their phones,
maybe
so.
I wouldn't really, but some people would say that because they were dumb, and they put their 450-pound bottom on top of that phone, and that's really kind of down to them. But I don't know.
Yeah.
Scott, do you use a case with the 6 Plus because of Benghazi? I use a case because I drop things. And if I didn't have a case, it would crack. And if you drop one of these without a case and you crack the screen, it has in-cell touch, which is wonderful technology. It makes it thinner. That also means that the IPS panel under here has to be replaced at the same time as the glass. You can't just replace the digitizer. It's like $400 if you crack the glass and you want to replace it on one of these things. So I have a case to protect the phone from my clumsiness and dropping, and I've even like had a phone in my hand and been speaking expressively, and there goes the phone to the wall. I don't know if you guys ever, but there's no way that this thing would live with me for like 2 years without protection from drops and things like that. So no, I don't. In fact, I don't think that the bin protection on the case is significant. I think the bin protection is going to be the aluminum and the interior metal and all of that stuff. So,
Yeah, see, that's funny. My iPhone 5, it's going commando. It has been for, I mean, since I got it. I got Apple Care Plus. I get to break it twice basically, and they'll give me a replacement for $50. But I haven't, I think it fell a couple times, like when I was just going to bed. It like banged against the radiator, but it's fine. There's like maybe a little bit of the black paint has chipped off one of the chamfered edges or something. And then most recently, I dropped it in the toilet, and it still works. So I think it's pretty durable, unless you're actually dropping it like on like a concrete sidewalk or something from like your ear. It's it's going to survive, and you can always get a replacement.
Yeah, it's a little disappointing. You paid for that, and then you haven't been able to be violent to your phone. But maybe right before the end, you can just break it on purpose once.
Oh, well, that's over. Well, that's what I was gonna do with the toilet incident. I was gonna defraud Apple. I actually brought it to the Apple store, but everything worked. So I was like, well, it's more fun to have a fun story about your phone that still works after falling in the toilet than it is to say, oh well, I got a free phone. You know.
Right.
And people probably don't ask to borrow your phone to do anything.
Well, no, they do, and then I tell them afterwards.
So did you give it to the guy or gal at the Apple store, and were you like, hey, this was in the toilet, here, check it out?
No, I didn't tell him. I was like, I have a problem with the lightning connector, which I did because it was sort of like sometimes it would connect, sometimes it wouldn't connect, and he like got the pin that they have like hanging from their neck, and he sort of fished out a little bit of lint from it, and then it worked every time. So I had no excuse. Like he still offered to replace it. He still offered to replace it. He was like, well, I did see it sort of not, respond once or twice. So we'll still, exchange it for you since you have Apple Care Plus. But I canceled my appointment because it worked. So I was like, what's the point if I get a replacement? Because when you get a replacement through Apple Care Plus, they get you a refurb, and so there was actually a fair chance that I would get mad at the refurb because of the screen or something. Like, if there was a dead pixel or the backlighting wasn't quite right. So I figured, I might as well stick with the phone that I have that I know works.
Yeah. So here's a question about the iPhone 6 review. It says, I get the impression from the review, other than the screen size and NFC, the 6 is a somewhat marginal improvement over the 5S. Was that your impression of the guts of the 6? I guess, well, a couple things is I wrote the review, honestly, from the perspective of someone who has an iPhone 5 and upgraded to the 6. 5S, my wife has a 5S. We tested the 5S. 5S has not been my daily driver. And so it was a bigger upgrade for me for that reason. In terms of the guts, if you're talking about the SoC, the A8 SoC, and specifically like CPU and graphics, then you can look at the review and see like a 15 to 20% increase in performance. I think, I don't know if I did. I don't think I actually broke down the math on the graphics side. But there was a nice increase in performance for the A8 over the in the iPhone 6 over the A7 and the 5S. It's not earth shaking, but it's not nothing, and so that's good. It's to me the big deal was that I was coming from the 5, not the 5S, so I was getting a bigger upgrade than that, and was kind of impressed by just the whole picture. I guess the other thing I'd say is that the reason I bought one ultimately, well, it boiled down to a couple things, but probably the thing that sold me on it was the display. And I may be a little disappointed in myself that in the display section of the review, I give you like an anecdote about how much better the display is than the OnePlus One. I give you a picture that shows you a 6 Plus up close, and you can see the pixels, individual pixels that I photographed, which is nice. And I give you the contrast ratios, which are substantially higher than like the iPhone 5 or the OnePlus One, like substantially higher. And the rest of the data is there. What I really didn't spend maybe enough time on or enough words on is how really awesome the display is. And one reason I didn't, honestly, is because I don't think you have that conversation without talking about the screen in the Samsung Galaxy Note 4, which is an OLED, a different tech, higher res, at least on paper, and also awesome. And the thing that I maybe didn't get out there because I was kind of holding back on that front for a possible future discussion is just that the display on this thing is amazing. That it's just beautiful, and that's maybe the number one reason I upgraded. The other thing is, don't underestimate the camera. Well, a couple things. One is I shot and included in the story a slow motion video at 720p resolution at 240 frames per second from Guild Wars 2 on a G-Sync monitor with 4K resolution. Here it is. Let me turn off the sound. That is way better than the slow-mo video that we were able to capture for these types of reviews in the past. This is a great tool for me for my job, and was a great justification for the phone upgrade. And honestly, like, that's just awesome. Like, I'm really glad that they built that in there. The other thing about the camera is, especially with the optical image stabilization and just the burst mode, which is awesome, 10 shots per second. You just hold your thumb down on the shot button and you get lots of shots, and then it kind of auto picks the sharpest focus one for you, or you can choose if you want. That's good enough, and the phone itself is fast enough. It has enough capacity in terms of storage and has the networking capability. I'm planning on shooting my pictures at CES this year on the phone. And guys, you know this, but I'll tell everybody else. Basically, the deal with CES that we kind of worked out in recent years is I go, I see things, I take pictures, I take notes, I send them to you guys, and then you write them up. And the faster I can get the pictures and notes to you guys, and the better those are, then the better our coverage is, because I don't have time to stop and write everything up. In fact, I don't have time to stop and write practically anything up myself. Doing that with the DSLR got to be so frustrating that I was shooting with the iPhone 5 at the end of CES last year. And frankly, the quality was a little bit embarrassing. But the connectivity was right. And so having a phone that combines much better quality, not SLR quality, but better quality with all of that is a big deal too. So there are a lot of reasons I'm impressed with, for my work, the iPhone 6 Plus and why I bought it. And I didn't always convey all that stuff in the review because I was trying to talk about the general case. But don't sleep on some of those features. If they're things that you want, then they're pretty nice reasons to upgrade.
Yeah, actually, about the DSLR stuff, I noticed a while ago that my iPhone 5 actually takes better low light pictures than my, I think it's a digital Rebel XT, the 350D Canon. Just because the sensor on that DSLR goes up to ISO 1600, but the iPhone still gets more light into its sensor and is able to, like, in a dark sort of restaurant, I can take much better pictures with the iPhone. So yeah.
New SLRs are even better than that by a lot, though. They're pretty freaky amazing. But yeah, I mean, that was the thing I talked about in the story, though. Like, I've got a Rebel T3i, which is, I think we're up to T5 higher. I don't even know. It's like every year they iterate. They don't always change that much, but they iterate every year. And so mine's 2-3 years old, and I can, with external tools, do lens correction for pin cushioning and noise reduction and all the things that you want to those images. But what comes out of an iPhone now is processed in ways that I appreciate, that I use, that make it ready for the web. And what comes out of my DSLR is not, and requires additional work that just generally don't have the time to do. And so you got more barrel distortion and things like that on this high-end camera that ought to do better. And I know that some of these things are coming in SLRs, but honestly, like, I think they need to be faster, and they've got to do a better job, because like, I'm going to upgrade the phone every couple of years. They're not making that case for me with their cameras, and so they need to lead so that their cameras don't look pretty tired by the end of the ownership cycle, if that makes sense. So, I don't know. We got another question. Any comments on the graph in that story that includes a 4770K? So this is about CPU performance, and we were kind of talking about Apple has really pushed on this front. I included a couple of desktop CPUs and a couple of the CPU benchmarks just for fun. And the ones that I used, I mean, all these things have to be cross-platform broadly to work on Android and iOS on Windows. And so these were browser-based benchmarks. And it's Kraken and SunSpider. They're both JavaScript benchmarks. And you can see there's a 4790K, then an AMD A107800, which is the latest Kaveri desktop chip from AMD in that class, and then the iPhone 6 and et cetera, et cetera. And the desktop CPUs are clearly faster, but they're not enough faster to like justify like the difference in power envelope of like an order of magnitude or more. And so it is a little bit like chilling in a way to see these numbers. I guess the thing is that you need to have a couple caveats there. One is these are browser-based tests, and they are open to optimization, and which browser you use on each platform will determine performance. I used an older build of Chrome for these desktop CPUs, and I used the latest build of Safari for the iPhone 6, and then the latest builds of Chrome on the Android devices that are in those OSs. So I think it's possible that you could see better performance out of a desktop CPU in some of these tests with a different browser. So it's not necessarily the case that this is that this contest is as close as it looks. The other thing I'll say is getting per thread performance to go up is really hard, which is one of the things we were talking about earlier. And being at 4x or thereabouts, like in Kraken, or maybe a little less even. This is more like 2.5x. It's not nothing. It's still something. But I think that if we're going to really ask this question about x86 CPUs and where they are compared to something like the latest Apple Core, I think we probably should do more testing before we draw too many conclusions from it. I do think though that this does serve just a little bit of a sort of a warning about some realities here of how much additional performance do you get with current technology when you expand to a 77 watt power envelope instead of a 7 watt power envelope, or less, whatever the iPhone's at, which per core is actually less than that, I'm pretty sure. But that's an interesting and tough question. The way that silicon scales, the way that you have these curves about like voltage squared determining power use in a chip, it's not always the case that you get the performance scaling that you want out of turning up your power envelope. And that means that mobile devices have a chance to continue closing the gap, especially when companies like Apple are pouring big money into chip design, chip architecture, CPU architecture. So, man, I don't know. I think it's going to be interesting in the next little while. We can explore this question in more depth. It's just 2 data points. I wouldn't make too much of them. So that's my take on that. Guys, there's another question here about, did you see the multitasking portion of the review here? Let's go to this. This is like the one thing that I worried about most when I bought myself a new iPhone was, will it multitask as well as like my Android devices like the Nexus 7 that I really like? And let's see. Where is that? Multitasking issue. Here it is. So, Geoff, you probably are familiar with the way Android multitasking happens, which is pretty much the way. Does it pretty much feel like the way Windows multitasking happens? I mean, it's not quite the same, but
no, it's not quite the same. I think it's doing something similar, especially with Lollipop and the new. Like, I don't think Lollipop gives you a live view when you do a task switch of what's actually happening, but the apps do tend to respond. I haven't had issues having to wait for apps to sort of completely reload and refresh the screen. There's usually sort of a brief update with something like Twitter where it's just loading the new tweets that have come in. But I don't think it delivers kind of a Windows-like experience where the apps are constantly bringing in data and always in the most up-to-date state.
yeah, I guess it's not. I don't know. iOS to me feels more like each app is like what you're doing in the front is they're going to be fast with that and that's going on, but everything else is really stopped. And when you switch back, then it has to kind of recover. And in some cases, like I talked about in the review, it takes some time to recover. And in some cases, and I have a little video of this in the review, as you switch through apps, if you're switching through 2 or 3 apps, it doesn't happen as often. But if you're switching through like 5 to 7 or 10 apps, like I sometimes do when I've got lots of stuff going on at once, and I'm kind of just like, power multitasking while I'm sitting on the couch watching football or something like that, apps get ejected from RAM and they have to restart themselves. And when that happens, it takes quite a bit of time for the app to restart. I mean, it's not the worst thing in the world because the iPhones are pretty fast, so they restart quickly, but it's not nearly as good as just, okay, this is available in RAM. And I did find that with the 6 Plus and the 6, when I'm just using it and I get into one of those sort of power multitasking sessions, that I will see these app ejections happen and the reloads happen and it feels slow. And that's in contrast to using basically the same set of apps on like a Nexus 7 2 gig or a Shield tablet, where generally speaking you don't get a lot of those reloads. They can happen, but it's maybe less likely. And I think Apple's choice to go with the 1 gig of RAM on the 6 Plus, which is an expensive phone that costs like $700-800, and only has 1 gig. I mean, that's tough. It's not my favorite choice, and honestly, like I said in the review,
really, it's just not your favorite choice.
Not my favorite choice. Like I said in the review,
that's as
you can
diplomatic
see.
as I think possible.
You can see it. Like you can see the reloads happening at times, and you just think, man, they could have done more memory. So that was Chuckula's question. At this stage, do you think a bump in RAM, a la the iPad Air 2, which has 2 gigs, would actually be more important than a newer SoC? I think that depends on the content of the new SoC, but I think that it would be a really curious choice to further increase performance and not go to 2 gigs of RAM. That would be strange. And one of my worries about the 6 Plus is now that we've seen that 2 gigs is a thing, that they've done that with the iPad Air 2, my expectation is that whenever we get like a 6S, the next generation, they'll bump up for all of those, and then you have half the RAM of other phones in the market. And when it comes time for iOS 9, iOS 10, then you're at low capacity on a phone that's maybe not that old compared to the other stuff out there, and it becomes more of a challenge. You've seen that with older iPhones where they're like, well, we're going to update the iPhone 4 to iOS 7, but then you do it and it's slow, and half the new features aren't implemented because they won't fit into RAM. I would prefer more memory. And that's really my one big caveat, or my one big criticism of this product, because the 6 Plus has been amazing for me, but I want better multitasking, and I think that means more RAM. So, my expectation is Apple's going to continue to have SoC advancements, CPU and GPU performance advancements. I don't want to discourage that, but I think it's going to look really weird to be like super turbo fast on the app in focus and then make you wait to switch. If you just go between 5 to 7 different apps. So that's my take. Other questions? We have more questions still. Are we going to run out of questions here? Are we gonna Twitch feed from CES live on the iPhone 6?
I don't know. Do you even have bandwidth to send pictures?
Bandwidth is terrible at CES. We tried to do a podcast and I couldn't. Like my voice was all like. You remember that last year? We're trying to talk about stuff so I don't think. I don't know. I don't think that's going to happen. It's tough because it's basically two of us at CES because you guys are back home writing up everything that I send you notes about. So I don't think that's going to happen. But we actually, Jordan and I had some conversations around just the timing of the podcast and all this. So maybe we'll do something. Let's see. Geoff, can you talk in any more detail about Microsoft's Arcadia service beyond what's in the article?
No, I think Microsoft hasn't actually come out and said anything confirming it, so it's just sort of a rumored, according to sources thing right now. It doesn't surprise me. We just probably won't learn more about it until other sources start talking or Microsoft comes out and starts discussing it publicly itself.
Well, reset it for people who aren't familiar. What is Arcadia service?
So it's basically a games and application streaming service, it sounds like, and it seems to be mostly for mobile devices, so you would be able to get Windows applications, maybe Xbox games, on devices that wouldn't normally be able to run those things locally. But it could also be sort of part of a larger sort of business model in terms of streaming applications and games to Windows users as well.
Cyril, are you still addicted to high fructose corn syrup Slurpees?
No, man, I'm done. I put on 25 pounds after I moved here.
Oh man! Welcome to North America.
I've lost 15 pounds since stopping the Slurpees and the other, fructose laden goods. So, yeah, no more.
Okay. Let's see. Thoughts on the Sony hacks? Oh man.
I still can't believe they pulled the movie out of theaters over that.
I think it's interesting that apparently this really was North Korea behind these attacks, and this is interesting because it's a sovereign nation attacking a multinational corporation, basically, which I think is somewhat new, and it's also a sovereign nation using like cyber tools as an instrument of terror, right? I mean, it's not like they didn't launch a missile, but it was basically an act of violence. It cost this company lots of money. It probably cost a lot of people their jobs. It cost opportunities for them. It was damaging, right? And
I don't know if I'd call it violence, but yeah, economic.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just saying that there's this. It's a strong tool, and it maybe stronger than maybe sanctions or something like that. I don't know. Like it's bad, and yeah, I mean it's upset him. It's a little strange to see a company that operates in the Western world and free nations be afraid enough of this sort of rogue state to go ahead and like just bend on the issue of the movie coming out.
Well, I mean, it is a Japanese company, and North Korea has nukes now, and they keep launching rockets into the Sea of Japan. So I kind of, I don't blame them entirely.
Yeah.
I'm not even sure that it's been, because I've seen a lot of, even just recently, a lot of posts questioning the North Korean origins, and the things that supposedly trace it back to them are not necessarily things that are difficult to spoof or.
Yeah, it's just that then I saw that blowback, and then the U.S. government actually came out and said, no, it was them, and the conversation kind of changed after that, right? So
Yeah.
I don't know. I maybe I mean I don't know. I literally don't know. But that was what happened. So I anyway, I just I couldn't believe then that Paramount was afraid to have additional screenings of Team America World Police. Did you see this?
Yeah.
Because people were gonna substitute that, and they're like, no, we don't want any. No, don't do that, because they didn't want retribution to come to them. I think it was really there were terrorist threats attached to this, like 9/11 style violence. That was the threat. That was went further than what they had already done with the hacking, by implying actual violence to people, like maybe in movie theaters. And after like Aurora, Colorado, and all of that stuff, I think that's the source of their concerns. I don't think that they had an easy choice to make in this.
It kind of sets a bad precedent, though.
Oh, it's horrible. But at the same time, I don't think it's up to Sony to fight that battle. I think that's up to the governments of these nations to take on North Korea. And I haven't heard much of anything about, hey, you don't do that, or we're going to bring you freedom, you know. And maybe we need to hear a little more of that, you know. And who knows?
I think their army is like 10 million soldiers or something. Like they have the biggest army, like freestanding army in the world at this point. So.
Well, it's all conscripts, but sure.
Oh yeah,
They probably haven't eaten in like a week, so.
I think that probably the U.S. is a little bit busy right now trying to basically bankrupt Putin by driving oil prices into the dirt over this Ukraine thing and the other stuff he's doing. Like, that's a weird proxy war that's happening now. So they may be a little bit occupied. I don't know.
Yeah.
But that's politics. We probably don't want to get too far into that. Let's see, what else is going on? Are we going to see a new video card review roundup using the AMD Omega drivers? I guess that's up to me. And I think the answer is that we have Christmas, we have some stuff I'm working on now, we have CES, and then after that is going to be time to have some graphics coverage. And potentially, like we said, in Q1 of next year, I think we're going to be talking about graphics a lot with new chips. I don't know that we're going to be covering the Omega drivers separately before things start getting interesting on the hardware front, but the Omega drivers will be a part of what we're doing. Regardless, I wish that I had time to look at those more. I think it's great and it's interesting that AMD is building in all the features that NVIDIA did over the past couple of years into their drivers. Plus, were there other things? No, it's mostly catch up, but it's good catch up because it's good features. I don't know, Cyril, were there other things? You wrote about Omega.
Yeah, I mean, there wasn't a lot of performance stuff. It was mostly new features, yeah. So I don't think, if we retested, I don't think we'd see a big difference.
No, I just mean, were there things that AMD put in its Omega drivers that were not in NVIDIA's drivers?
Oh, I would have to check. There was a lot of stuff.
Yeah, there was a ton of new features.
Yeah, let me see. I mean, you had VSR, that was an NVIDIA thing. FreeSync.
G-Sync.
Yeah, they had a lot of like QA improvements, which I guess were not necessarily in the drivers themselves, but just the results of that were in the drivers. Just they fixed a lot of bugs.
I think they did some of the CPU performance optimization that NVIDIA did about last spring or so. Where if you're CPU bound, then they're better. NVIDIA did it kind of preemptively to sort of counter Mantle when AMD was pushing out with that, and then it was kind of like everybody's like, well, geez, if you just do it with Direct3D, then just do it with Direct3D. And I think this is AMD saying, okay, we'll do it with Direct3D too, and so that's good. But
Yeah.
we should do a frame time analysis of that. We should do it with some lower end CPUs. Capture and streaming support in Mantle games. That's nice. That's something that NVIDIA didn't have because they didn't have Mantle, but they did have streaming in the GeForce Experience app.
Hmm.
Better video processing. Man, I'm just not very excited about being able to apply custom filters in a driver, but no, I mean really,
Yeah.
it's not very often that I'm like, well, I'm going to do that, and I go to the driver. But I guess some of these maybe are applied automatically.
That like the fluid motion thing looks potentially interesting, like interpolating new frames to make videos smoother. But I think it's only for Blu-ray. Like I guess the software needs to support it. So yeah, I don't know what you'll be able to use it in. But yeah, like the contour removal and like edge enhancement stuff. That's you know, I'm sure some people will be happy to have it, but I don't really care personally.
Yeah, I mean, it is nice that PC generally, like if you have a home theater PC and you bring any video source in and you have a good graphics card, and you keep the drivers up to date, it's going to make it look about as good as it can for you. And they're investing on that front to make that happen. And the home theater PC experience is pretty good from that standpoint. And there are cases where I have had content where it was too dark, and I could go into I used to have for a long time I had an AMD card. Lately I've had an NVIDIA card in my home theater PC. I go into the control panel and turn the gamma up in the control panel for the extent of that movie, so that I could see what was happening on my display, which just wouldn't reveal what I needed otherwise. So, I'm glad that stuff exists, I guess, but some of it is good and some of it's cheesy. So, I've never been a fan of upscaling, for instance. But you do want good upscaling, but I've never been like, oh, it's gonna look like 4K when I put my DVD through this filter. Like I never bought that. So, but yeah, Omega drivers are something we will pay attention to in the context of all this stuff coming in January, February, March. Probably not separately and not before, just by virtue of the constraints that we have in terms of just time and all of that. But you never know. I get the itch with some of this graphic stuff, and I just have to go cover it. So we'll see.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions from the chat, guys? We've been doing this for a while. I think we have pretty much exhausted the questions in the chat, and we've talked about the stuff we said we're going to talk about. And Jordan isn't even here to end it up for us, so I think we may just have to call it. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, that's it, everyone. Bye.
That's it. No, thanks to everybody who came in and watched and asked questions in the chat. I'm glad we got to kind of do something a little more interactive, and that Geoff got to talk a bunch. Cyril got to talk a little. Cyril, we need more questions for you next time. You should pay some people just come in and ask Cyril questions.
I've already paid some people.
Okay, good. We'll work that out. But no, it was fun. So I think the next time that we do a podcast will be in the new year with Jordan. But you know what? This is this possibility that we decide to do one of these supplemental things on video before then, if a lot happens and we're available. So we'll have to see. Anyway, thanks everybody for joining us, and we will, I guess, let you know on the website the next time that we're going to do one of these. My expectation is it may be a little bit longer than usual between, but maybe not. So anyway, take care. Have a good night. We'll catch you later.